the teachers, especially when they've worked in tiny schools of 250 students where they might have one or two new students that come in every single year, for instance. We have one or two new students come in every single day.
You're listening to Around the School Table, hosted by me, Steve Davis, and proudly powered by Xuno Suite. We'll be bringing together the many voices shaping primary and secondary education across Australia, from principals and teachers to education thought leaders and system innovators. Whether you're in the classroom, the staff room, or the boardroom, this is your podcast to be informed, inspired, and connected. Today on Around the School Table, we meet Ryan Ma, Assistant Principal at Saltwater P9 College, a school that's grown from 490 students to more than 2,200 in just 6 years. With a community representing over 29 nationalities and 81 languages, Saltwater's a microcosm of contemporary Australia. It balances incredible diversity with the demands and opportunities of rapid expansion. Ryan's own, inverted commas, tiger mother upbringing and affinity with the multicultural parent community gives him a unique vantage point on nurturing belonging and ambition. From embracing the International Baccalaureate's inquiry-driven philosophy to harnessing data and collaboration, think Moneyball meets education, Ryan and his team are pioneering new ways to engage students and empower staff. And if you're curious at all about scaling a thriving school while keeping culture and care at the centre, I think this is going to be a conversation you'll enjoy. Ryan, welcome to Around the School Table.
Thanks for having me, Steve. Very much looking forward to putting my expertise to use and just having a nice casual conversation and nice chat.
All right, well, I think that's a very noble ambition. Let's see how we go. Saltwater P9 College only opened in 2019. It already serves more than 2,200 students, which is impressive by anyone's standard, given it started with 490. What have been some of the challenges along that growth curve?
As you mentioned a bit before, when you experience rapid growth like that, where we're pretty much think about kind of log scale growth, you're doubling pretty much student population year after year after year, right? So, and I think one of the big things that when we promised ourselves when we did open up the school was that we were going to go and provide the best education for the kids that we did have. So it wasn't, very much like a slow pace where, we can make mistakes, we can go and slowly grow it over time. But, year after year, when you start to double your school population, we still want to go and provide the best opportunity for all of our students. And when you have, once again, doubling every single year in terms of the student population, it does become very, very tricky.
That would be tricky on a daily basis, not just at a macro sort of monthly or quarterly level, wouldn't it? Would you and all the other staff members feel that as a tangible thing as part of the cut and thrust of life?
Well, definitely. I think, I guess probably the initial shock of it is probably a big shock to for the teachers, especially when they've worked in tiny schools of 250 students where they might have one or two new students that come in every single year, for instance. We have one or two new students come in every single day, right? So, Monday morning is usually when we call Christmas time, because we've got a row of families, 5 or 6 new families turning up Monday morning, 9 o'clock, ready to meet their new teachers, ready to just, be immersed back into our saltwater system, right? So, and I guess, probably the initial shock of it is hard work, but it's almost kind of expected now that's just the saltwater culture and saltwater way, right? So for most schools, that experience one or two new students that might float into their school community, we get pretty much one or two almost on a daily basis.
I just think back to my growing up. With my dad's job, I moved to quite a number of schools, and that horrible thing of having to learn new people. The interesting thing is, I think when it's a rare occurrence, the other school kids have more of a, ooh, who's this outsider? Whereas, tell me if I'm wrong, but my intuition is, at Saltwater, because it's such a regular occurrence, perhaps it's normal and there's not as much of that stigma of being the new kid.
Yeah, definitely. You hit it right on the nail. Because of the sheer amount of new families and new students that come into joining our school, it's just almost second nature. So, you might be the new kid for literally a week here at Saltwater, and then next week there's going to be another new kid that's going to be turning up. It might not be in your class, but but because also too, we've got such a large student population of 2,200. You add 10 students, for instance, and it's less than 1% of your overall population, right? When you're in a small school, say even 500, if you add five kids, that's 1% of their school population, right? So when we have kind of a family of five that comes in, you're like, oh, we're only moving the school enrollments populations, the needle just a little bit more.
Now, I understand you had a bit of a tiger mother upbringing yourself, and I guess that means you can relate to many of the parents, many of whom come from China and India. But I understand there's more than 29 different nationalities, more than 81 different languages spoken, which is incredible for my Anglo ears. How's the school adjusted to this broad demographic?
Yeah, definitely. I think we are a school of many cultures. If you do turn up to our school, if you know any context about Saltwater College, you just walk through the school gates and you just look at the diversity that exists. And I think that's the reality. If you actually look at Australia as a whole, like we are a very diverse country, and certainly, definitely, the 29 different countries that our students come from, and the various languages that they go and speak. It should, like we like to say, it's just a microcosm of what Australia is demonstrating and actually is. Right. And yeah, not to go and say that, the tiger parents only belong to kind of the Indian and the Chinese families. I think most parents who care about educations will want what the best outcomes of them are. I just think that I had that extra little push where, you turned home with 95% on a test and mom's yelling at you where the extra 5% is.
I mean, I thought my parents were harsh, but, to think 95% is not quite good enough, that's another level, Ryan. And it's almost like you've created this experience at Saltwater where you're under that same pressure in your professional life.
Well, I think definitely, and I think if we look at our school mission in terms of educating students to thrive in an ever-changing world, it is a little bit of as Simon Sinek would term it, as an infinite goal. You're always chasing the rainbow. You're always trying to chase the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, where it's almost an unachievable task. But I guess if we look at our profession and we look at what we want, the best out of the students. It sometimes, you want to get them to be in the prime position to be where they really want to be. Right. And, for some students, it might be 95%. For some students, it might be 100%.
Just with the number as well, thinking back to my school days, forging some good relationships with teachers is always wonderful, and being known, walking around the schoolyard. My schools weren't as big as Saltwater. Does that aspect of that bond and that relationship happen, or is it replaced and transitions in a different way?
I think it's probably more the latter than the former. Of course, when you look at upsides and downsides of a big school community like ours, certainly you don't have that small 250 school community feel where every parent knows each other, that the principals, part of the footy club, that so on and so on. In a school of 2,500, it is quite a challenge if you take into account, the school staff and ES staff that's around, along with the student cohort too. So that is one of the big downsides of a large school, that the cultural piece, it's probably not as tight knit as a 250 school. But with that said too, is that, schools have to find new and innovative ways to kind of build a community feel. I know for us, for instance, because we have such a wide variety of cultural backgrounds and languages spoken for our community, we do invite some of those parents and the family members in when we're doing a unit of inquiry towards cultural backgrounds and understanding differences between the cultural backgrounds of all of our students. So on one side, it is a double-edged sword where you don't have that tight, small knit community, but on the flip side, the diversity also helps teach the students about the world that they live in, that we aren't monocultural, and that there are people with differences around the world.
I'm going to pick up on the term you use, the unit of inquiry, because Saltwater follows the International Baccalaureate, or the IB curriculum. How does that approach and that emphasis on student agency and inquiry-based learning influence the way the school operates?
Yeah, so and then I think the International Baccalaureate program that we have really ties in nicely, because if you look at our student population, majority of them are coming from international backgrounds, and their families are coming from international backgrounds. So it's that once again it's almost the opposite of, here's a monocultural scenario where everybody believes the same way, everyone has the same values, everyone has the same beliefs, and so everyone has the same perspectives. The International Baccalaureate approaches get students to really focus more on the soft skills of critical thinking and creative thinking. And once again, understanding different people's perspectives, that, that different perspectives does exist in our world. And that even though there might be differences in those perspectives, they might be right or correct in their own ways and their own beliefs. Right. So I definitely think that the International Baccalaureate program fits the demographics of our students and our community in Saltwater.
One thing about, I've got daughters in school at the moment, and you do group exercises, and in more of a monocultural kind of school, there's not that much difference in that unit of inquiry. I imagine here, kids are going to get exposed to very different ways of thinking and approaching different questions, maybe different value systems, which the research tells us just leads to a greater opportunity for a more interesting outcome and creative potential.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it follows along of the Department of Education's kind of capabilities as well. When we talk about intercultural understanding, it's one thing to be reading it out of a textbook or watching a YouTube video in terms of, trying to having that intercultural understanding versus living and breathing it when, you've got 5 other students in the class that will be able to go and share their experiences and their cultures with that student. So, it's definitely that it changes the conversation a lot more from, here's what the textbook says and let's just read it from a textbook, as opposed to, my background or my family celebrating Chinese New Year the next week, right? So then it actually starts a different type of conversations, definitely within the class and also between the different students as well.
Does lunchtime and recess time smell like an amazing marketplace of foods and flavors?
Oh, definitely. I think in a classroom, especially if it's, a peak summertime, if it's 40 degrees inside and it's a giant sweat box, definitely has a lot of different smells. But definitely, yeah. And that's another talking point, too, in terms of having different lunch boxes where, you might have students that are bringing in just a cheese sandwich, cheese toasty, and then you've got other ones that are bringing in delicious smelling curries, where I even think that some of the teachers try to go and sneak in and ask the parents to bring in some cultural food for them too for lunch. So definitely very diverse student background that we have here.
Still juggling forms the old-fashioned way? Say hello to Student Forms by Xuno. You can create, collect, and manage all your student forms online in one simple, secure platform. Save time, stay organised, and quick access everything you need anytime. Visit xuno.com.au and see how Student Forms by Xuno can work for your school.
Now, you mentioned teachers, so let's talk about staffing. With the school growing rapidly and being so big, you have faced some challenges, not only recruiting teachers, but also keeping them. What strategies have you found work best in retaining great staff, and how does avoiding planning in isolation play a part in that process?
It kind of goes hand in hand. Once again, like I said, we're a completely different kettle of fish compared to a school that's of 250, where you have 10, 12 teachers. So in a school of 250 students, you might have a school of 10 to 15 teachers. So whereas those schools would have teachers who might be just teaching in isolation. So you might be the lone year 3 teacher, or you might be the lone art teacher, or you might be the lone PE teacher of the entire school. So definitely a lot of probably planning and teaching for learning, for instance, would be done in isolation. Whereas for us, we've got, a school of 2,200. It's mostly a team approach to try to go and plan. So, our PE team, we've got a team of 4 for the primary PE team, and we've got a team of 3 for our secondary PE team. So as a whole PE faculty, we've got 7 teachers that are around that, once again, that will kind of plan together, look at the students that they have, or have different conversations in terms of what are the strengths of the students across the board, and then kind of plan accordingly. So I think tackling back onto the second part of your question in terms of strategies to kind of help teacher retention, probably that staff that collaborative culture of the teachers helps to help retain staff too. So that they're not kind of like the one teacher that just plans on their own, right? So like there isn't a day here where a teacher would literally not talk to anybody or not talk to another teaching faculty team. Like they have to kind of work together as a team. And because of that too, there's a lot of social aspects which allows them to, grab a coffee outside of school, next door at the cafe, that type of thing too, to kind of help build those social bonds, right? So definitely in terms of retaining teachers, that's a smart strategy.
There's another professional analogy that just occurred to me. I do another podcast in the medical field and have often heard from doctors, especially in hospitals, where they have these, I forget the actual name of them, but diagnostic groups, and you've got the different specialists and maybe a nurse and a few other people, a pathologist maybe, and they look at case after case and they all put in their two bobs worth, and it's the better outcome for the patient because their plight gets fresh input from different levels of experience and seeing things. Is that what happens in this collaborative approach to planning with your teachers?
Definitely, 100%. And I think the diagnostic approach that you mentioned too hits it right on the nail, especially when we know that teacher relationships with students are such a big key. So especially when we know that some teachers are really struggling with a specific student in mind, but that student is completely different in, let's say, the PE setting where they love PE. So I know that teachers have definitely worked collaboratively to try to go and try to understand what's causing that behavior of that student and trying to find solutions to go and help that student. So by being such a big collaborative approach with that, and in such a large school that we have, that collaborative approach becomes quite easy in terms of trying to solve problems rather than somebody sitting there stewing on a problem by themselves. They have access to a wealth of 250 other teachers or experts in the school of trying to go and help alleviate that problem. So I think that really helps with the counteract that kind of working in isolation type situation.
Now, I've been told you're a big fan of Brad Pitt, the baseball movie Moneyball, in particular how it focuses on the details and the statistics rather than the gut feelings. And I believe you see the software Student Maps as your bread and butter when analysing both students and complete cohorts. Can you tell us more about that? Take us into that world.
Yeah, so definitely. So so obviously, like with most people, I think they watched the movie with Moneyball, which then kind of piqued my interest in inquiring into how can we translate the big key concepts that the movie was about into a more of an educational setting, right? So I think that a lot of the teaching profession, as you pointed out, a lot of it stems from kind of gut feeling, and which I think teachers do have a very, very good gut instinct in terms of the difference that they're making in students' lives. I guess I'm more kind of trying to move the pin a little bit more towards how do we quantify that? So, an interesting thing that always kind of tweaks my mind is that when you talk to a teacher, they always think that every teacher in the world is the best teacher themselves. Or you talk to any teacher. But it's in my mind now, it's like, okay, so if you are claiming that you are the best teacher in the world, you're making the most difference to the students. How do you quantify that? How do you find evidence to go and know that you are making a big difference, right? Because the analogy that we use here at Saltwater too is that using the data, it's almost kind of like leveraging Google Maps. Right. So you need to kind of make sure that you're always constantly checking in to see that, you are heading towards the right direction. Imagine trying to get to a destination without access to Google Maps. Right. So you might be driving along for the 2 hours, but then you start to realize you're going to say, hey, I actually headed towards the wrong direction. So you might be saying you're working very, very hard. You're a very, very effective driver. You're staying towards the speed limit. All of a sudden, you realize you're actually on the wrong path. Right. So I think when we kind of look at applying the Moneyball analogy in towards that, it's just taking a little bit more of a data and an analytical approach to see if what you planned in place is actually effective. And is it making a difference? Is it effective from a results perspective?
Ryan, does anything come to mind, perhaps obviously anonymized, but is there a specific example where this approach and that integration, the use of student maps has intersected with your day and with challenges?
Yeah, so definitely. So we definitely use student maps as a tool to go and help just, to provide evidence for tough conversations. Because when you start to go and have a conversation with the teacher to go and say, hey, I've noticed a few things that is happening in your class, and the students might not be optimizing their learning experiences, and you suddenly have that quantifiable data that actually backs you to go and say, when compared to the other year 5 classes who've had much larger effect sizes in terms of NAP plan results or teacher judgment results or PAT results. Suddenly now it's actually quantifiable where you can have those conversations with the teachers, but not as a a slap on the wrist, or not as a belt to whip them over the heads with. It's much more what support can we help put in place to go and help you become more effective as a teacher. And then that suddenly now opens up a bit more of a different conversations with the teachers, where it's not we're going to use data, throw it in your face to go and justify your work. It's more like, well, we've noticed these trends with it, and what can we do? And not only does that work with students that might not be effective, but it's also looking at how do we better the effective teachers and then make them even more effective. That too.
Would it be fair to say you're kind of treating it as a unit of inquiry?
Yeah, definitely. It's very much like a unit of inquiry with the teachers to go on and for them to even identify the trends too. So we're probably not at that point yet where I'm still probably doing a lot of the driving. But I think eventually over the next couple of years, once we start to put the processes in place, teachers really will become much more self-driving in terms of leveraging data and looking at their own effect on their students. Where we can then come in as a bit more of a critical friend, just to go and say, what can we help support you with, and put in some processes there.
It just occurred to me that maybe this sort of supporting insight and some data about what's happening is what's required, especially as schools get larger, to replace what would normally happen in a smaller school. You just look over the fence or the wall and you'd be seeing this yourself, which isn't practical in such a big school. Is there something to that dynamic?
Yeah, I think so. I think what data also does too is that it also lets us to kind of put a bit of a consistent practice in place too for all the teachers. Like as we mentioned before, in a school of 250 where you only have 10 teachers, you can all meet in the morning for a morning coffee in the staff room and have that same conversation, right? In a school of 250 teachers, much different conversation from that. But if the processes are in place and a software like Student Maps, where it all sits in one repository, we can look at the same targets and the same benchmarks across the board. And once again, too, because of the technology now and all the lockdowns, like we've mastered the use of WebEx and Zoom now, where we can have conversations where we don't all need to also be in the same room.
Yeah, it's great. Mind you, I've got an image now of 250 teachers queuing up for a coffee.
Oh, we tried to do that. We tried to go have a few odd PD days where we can afford to actually go and have everybody together to have a discussion. But when you get to 250 teachers, you almost need to hire out the Melbourne Exhibition Centre in order to have the same outcome, as opposed to a small little staff room of 100 teachers.
Just in closing, looking ahead, what's the next big challenge for Saltwater P9? And what gives you the most hope about the future of education in places like Point Cook?
Yeah, so probably the biggest, I guess the next steps for us is, once again, trying to go and get consistency. In a school of 250 teachers, you definitely get a wide spread of consistency in terms of teaching practice. So it's over the course of the next couple of years to really fine tune our teaching practice and are like making sure that we are getting the most out of our students and their learning outcomes. That's very, very tough with a big school. In terms of what do I see? I definitely see a very, very bright future for the students. It definitely is very, very ever changing. When you look at things now of how easily information is accessible for the students, where I literally can go and type something into ChatGPT and get a step-by-step plan of how to learn something within 10 seconds. Teaching, I think, is shifting. I do think that now, too, is that the relationship piece of teaching the students and their social etiquette and their approach to working with others and their collaborative skills are probably going to be the most important piece, as opposed to what we grew up with of sitting here and memorizing the times tables until the cows come home, or memorizing the first 20 elements of the periodic table. Anything that is Googleable now, that's almost becoming outdated, right? Whereas now we're really looking at kind of more the bigger piece of conceptual understanding and probably application of skills, and helping students understand that the soft skills, like the grit, the perseverance, all of those capabilities that you can't really pick up from a textbook, whereas you can go and pick up from a textbook to memorize that Canberra is the capital of Australia, right? So I do think that it is shifting, but I do think that the future is very, very bright.
To finally tap into that sense of diversity, and you've had all my questions, if your Taika mum was running this interview, what would she have asked you that I have not asked you?
Yeah, she'd probably go and say, well, what's missing 5%, and how can you go and improve that, really? But with that said, too, is that I think different people in the world, different students need different types of motivation, right? So I know that I certainly wouldn't be in the place that I am now if my parents didn't kind of put that pressure on me earlier, right? So I think now at my age, I'm certainly reaping the benefits of the expectations and the high expectations that my parents had for me. I don't know that if they were any softer than me, that I would be in the same position that I am now. So I think there is double-edged swords with things. And yeah, the funny thing is that I'm probably following the same footsteps and putting the same applications to my child, really. So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, I think.
Ryan Ma, thanks very much for joining us on Around the School Table.
Thank you for having me, Steve.